All three winners in the SEC on Wednesday were down at halftime. Two of them didn't even take their first lead until the final seconds. It's the SEC, and it just means more.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton. You are joining at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, 52 weeks out of the year. I want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. Remind you all that today's episode can be listened to ad-free on Amazon Music and is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. But Leaf and I previewed this slate of games, talked about the excitement of these three matchups in the SEC, and boy, howdy did that deliver on Wednesday evening. All three of them featured second-half comebacks. Two of those games, the team that won didn't lead until the final seconds. We're going to talk about all those games, plus some Big 12 results, one blowout, two much closer games, won by a pair of very solid teams. We got an overtime win by Rick Pitino and the Johnnies to discuss in the final segment, as well as some previews for tonight's games going on here on Thursday. Lots of fun stuff. Jam-packed episode. Will start the one matchup between two ranked teams that took place on Wednesday. Texas A&M stuns Ole Miss 63-62. A shocking final result going on here. The A&M, the Aggies, go out and beat the Rebels 63-62. They did not lead until the final possession of this game, I think 13 seconds or so when they took their lead. Ole Miss was up by 4 with 27 seconds left. Zurich Phelps scored for A&M to get it within 2. Ole Miss then got fouled, missed the front end of the 1-and-1, and Manny Obaseki hits a 3, 13 seconds left. The no-middle defense failed Chris Beard as they allowed penetration kick out. A guy who's made 6 threes on the season drills a 3, gives them their first lead of the game with 13 seconds left. Ole Miss, who had a timeout, opted not to use it, got the ball into Sean Padula, who was great all night long, as he has been all season long for Ole Miss. They bring the ball up. They don't even get a shot attempt, lose the ball in the final seconds. There's a scrum for the basketball. The clock winds out, and it just, you felt like you could hear a pin drop. It was a stunning result. A team that hadn't led all game suddenly gets a lead, and there's no timeout. There's no even chance to really catch your breath. A&M took the lead, and suddenly there was just kind of a 13 seconds of panic, and then all of a sudden they won the basketball game. It was crazy. It was chaos. It's what we've seen from so many SEC games, so many college basketball games this season. A tremendous result for an A&M team that has been hot and cold this year. It's been a big storyline about them. When they're hot, they can beat just about anybody. They can go out and get a great road win over a very good team in the Rebels. We've seen them have some inconsistencies, but they win this game without Wade Taylor IV or Zurich Phelps having particularly great games. Wade Taylor recently back from an injury. He struggled in this game. Phelps struggled in this game, particularly beyond the arc. Those two guys combined to shoot 0 of 11 from 3. As a team, A&M was 8 of 28, just under 29%. They had 20 turnovers. If you told me that A&M missed 23s and had 20 turnovers against Ole Miss, I can tell you right now, I would not have thought they would win this game. Certainly if you told me they only led for 13 seconds, I definitely would not believe they won. That is what makes this a gut-wrenching loss for Ole Miss, who got out-rebounded by 17, also only shot 37% from the field. It's hard to take a lot of bad losses in the SEC. This certainly isn't a terrible loss for Ole Miss. You always want to take care of stuff on your home court. Let me rephrase. It's not a terrible loss in the sense of analytically it's not going to crush them, anything like that. But when you led a game for 39 minutes and 47 seconds and you don't win, that is pretty darn crushing. I imagine there's going to be some sleepless nights in Mississippi for Chris Beard and the staff and the players after that one. But it wasn't even the only crazy result in the SEC. It wasn't the only result where a team was down by 7 points at halftime on the road, came back, took a lead in the final 30 seconds, and won. Literally, there was 2 games in the same conference where that storyline is true. Florida, the 5th-ranked Gators, Todd Golden's club, comes back, stuns South Carolina, 70-69 the final score. Literally the same exact storyline. They were down 7 at half. They did not lead until the final seconds of this game. Elijah Martin got a steal on an inbounds pass. They set up their offense. He got the ball. He went to the rim. He scored, he got fouled. He tied it at the free throw line. It was one of 13 steals for Florida, part of 15 turnovers that the Gamecocks had in this game. South Carolina scored, but then Will Richard had scored for Florida. They take the lead. It's a heartbreaking loss for South Carolina. They are now 0-6 in the SEC. Lamont Paris's team was coming off being a 6 seed last year, coming off, AP Coach of the Year for Lamont Paris. Yes, they had a lot of roster turnover, and it was kind of expected they wouldn't be as good as they were last year, but I don't think anybody expected them to be 0-6. It's a bit of a Dennis Gates-esque trajectory for Lamont Paris, hopefully with another step forward, the way that Dennis Gates in Missouri has taken a step forward this year, where Dennis Gates had a great first year for Missouri, struggled mightily in the second year, including not winning a single game in conference play. I suspect South Carolina will pick up a win. I don't think they're going to go winless, but there are not a lot of easy wins in conference play. And when you lead a game for 39 and a half minutes and you don't pull off the victory, that really hurts. Florida 17-2 on the year, including 4-2 in the SEC. Once again, the storyline for the Gators, the backcourt dominates. Will Richard had 22 points. Walter Clayton had 16 points, 7 assists. Elijah Martin had 14 points. The rest of the team combined had just 18 points, so they're a bit overly reliant on those 3 guards, but we've seen better performances from Alex Condon. He had a rough shooting night. We've seen better performances from their other front court player, Ruben Chinyelu, so I suspect that we'll see those guys continue to be more consistent, but this team kind of lives and dies by that backcourt, and it's a veteran backcourt. It's an experienced backcourt. Our friend Leif Tulin described it as the best backcourt in the SEC, arguably the best backcourt in college basketball. They didn't look great this game, Florida as a team, but the backcourt got them that W with key performances from Martin and Richard down the stretch in particular. And last but not least, continuing our SEC conversation, the final game of the day in the conference, Arkansas. Finally, off the schneid. South Carolina is now the lone winless team in the SEC as Arkansas gets their first conference win. They beat Georgia 68-65, and it was a similar story. Not quite exactly the same as the Florida and Texas A&M wins, but a similar story. Arkansas was down 12 at halftime. They ended up taking a lead, I think like 2 minutes or so left was when they took their first lead. Somewhere in the final 4 minutes of the game, they took their first lead. Ultimately, Adu Thiero put this team on his back. The storyline coming into the game was Boogie Fland, who's been Arkansas's best player, at least one of their best players, averaging 15 points, 6 assists, 3.5 rebounds per game. He's out for the rest of the season with the hand injury. He had surgery on it, according to Coach Calipari. He suffered the injury a few weeks ago, but played the last 2 games. Cal said after the game that he probably shouldn't have played in those games. So they're getting him some rest. They're getting him done for the year, getting him healthy, getting him ready for the draft. It's an unfortunate blow for a team. But Leaf and I spoke about this on Wednesday's show that while Fland is a great player, and this is not a knock on him at all, it's possible that him not being in the mix could help Arkansas in the sense that they have a lot of players who typically are better with the ball in their hands, namely John L. Davis and DJ Wagner. And without Fland, those guys will get the ball more. And Cal actually alluded to this after the game. He said, hey, some guys have been saying they want the ball more or saying they need the ball more. And now, we got 15 shots per game that's available because Boogie's not in the mix. So it did seem like it helped them in this game. Some guys played a little bit more free. It seemed like a good thing. And again, that's not saying that Boogie was holding this team back by any stretch. He's a phenomenal basketball player. It just felt like there was too many cooks in the kitchen for this Calipari club. And now that might be opening up some opportunities for other guys to get the ball more where they may thrive a little bit more. This game comes down to the wire. John L. Davis steals a pass from Silas DeMary with about 48 seconds left. The game is tied at 63. Thiero scores, gives them a 2-point lead with about 30 seconds to go. Asa Newell gets fouled, freshman for Georgia, very clutch this year. He almost led them to a win over Auburn last week. He knocks down these 2 free throws, 65 all with 14 seconds left. Cal ran what I thought was a good play. We're typically fairly critical of Cal, but he basically encouraged DJ Wagner to go downhill, try to get a shot up, but to make sure to get it up in a spot where Arkansas could get an offensive rebound if he missed. That's exactly what happened. Wagner threw up a shot in the lane, missed it. Thiero got the offensive rebound, got fouled, made the first free throw to give them a lead with 2 seconds left. Missed the second one, but while 4 Georgia players were standing around, Thiero beat all of them to the basketball, grabbed the offensive rebound, laid it in for good measure as the clock expired. Arkansas ends up winning by 3 with Thiero scoring their final 5 points, all in a 30-second span. He ends the game 17 points, 11 rebounds, 5 of 8 from the field, a phenomenal performance from him. Freshman Carter Knox, got to give him some flowers as well. 13 points. 11 of those points came at the free throw line. He didn't shoot it all that well outside of the stripe, but did a great job of getting to the line. Also tacked on 6 rebounds. Arkansas, for what it's worth, 29 and 34 as a team from the line. Tough loss for Georgia. Had every opportunity to win this basketball game, but Coach Calipari very happy to be off the schneid to get that first W out of the way and hopefully build some momentum for his club going forward. It'll be interesting to see if they can continue to play well without Fland. Again, a very talented player, but certainly something that could actually open up this team a little bit for the rest of the season. Well, folks, we had a pair of Big 12 powers pick up comeback wins on Wednesday, while a third, they didn't need to come back. They just absolutely obliterated their opponent. We're going to talk about those games and a pair of games in the Big 10 as well, all coming up in just a second. But first, folks, therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve your sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule, well, it can be a challenge. And that's where TALKSPACE comes in. TALKSPACE is the leading virtual therapy provider, and it makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With TALKSPACE, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, TALKSPACE is covered by so many insurance plans, and for the most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with TALKSPACE when you go to TALKSPACE.com/lockedoncollege and enter code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to TALKSPACE.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's TALKSPACE.com/lockedoncollege, promo code SPACE80. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton here, still recapping an epic day of games on Wednesday in college basketball. The SEC had 3 epic comebacks, but it wasn't the only great results we saw on Wednesday. We had 3 great games in the Big 12 we'll talk about here, and then we got a fun result in the Big East and some previews for you to close out the show. First, we got Baylor taking on Kansas State. Certainly a game that we would have expected to always have a little bit of fireworks just from Jerome Tang having spent so much time as an assistant coach with the Bears and Scott Drew. But Kansas State not playing very well this year. Frankly, Baylor not playing as well as we expected them to. They're out of the top 25. They snuck back in and then promptly lost last week and fell back out of the top 25. But looked for a while like this might be another disastrous loss for the Bears. They were down by 4 at halftime to Kansas State, but stormed back, outscore the Wildcats 44-32 in the second half, picked up a comfortable 8-point victory. Again, it was a nice bounce back for Baylor. They're now 3-3 in the Big 12, not where they wanted to be, but still at least in a decent position going forward, 11-6 overall. They did this on the strength of 2 things. Their 3-point shooting, which was 38%. 3 things, I'll say. Their 3-point shooting, 38%. Their lack of turnovers, they only had 4 in the game, and VJ Edgecombe. An incredible performance for VJ, a player who has yet to fully develop or showcase, I should say, his offensive abilities. He's been a good defensive player. He's an extremely high-level athlete, but we haven't seen the offense really pop in the way that we would want it to. He's like a mini version of Cooper Flagg in that sense. They're not super similar players, but the narrative around Cooper Flagg has been that of, hey, he's a great defensive player. He's a good teammate. He's going to help you win, but we haven't seen that offensive explosion. Then he had the 42-point game, and the talks about that quieted. This may have been VJ Edgecombe's game to quiet the doubters regarding his offense. Coming into this game, he had not scored 20 points in a single college basketball game. He dropped 30. against this Kansas State club. He had 3 assists and 2 steals. He was 8 of 13 from the field. He was 3 of 7 from 3. The three-point shooting has been a big concern for Edge come up to this point. So 3 of 7 from there is great. He also got to the charity stripe 12 times and knocked down 11 of them for a 30-point game. Much needed for VJ to do this. Much needed for Baylor to see him show this capability to do it against a Kansas State team that is coached by a former assistant coach that has beat this team the last couple of years. Really nice signature performance for VJ, and the kind of game that'll endear him to Baylor fans for a long time, even though we know he's only going to be there for 1 season. Also got to give a shout out to Jalen Celestine, the Cal transfer, came off the bench, had 18 points and 7 boards, shot 4 of 7 from 3. Wildcats dropped to 1-5 in the Big 12. The season has just not at all gone according to plan. This would have been a nice opportunity for this team to sort of maybe right the ship for the last month and a half of the year. Instead, they fall apart in the second half, especially on the defensive end of the floor. The team was 5 of 15 from 3 by players not named Brennan Howson, who was 4 of 9. Wildcats now just 7-10 on the year as things continue to look not so rosy for Jerome Tang after that great run to the Elite Eight a few years ago. Sticking in the Big 12, Kansas comes back and beats TCU on the road, 74-61 the final here. The Jayhawks, very close game at halftime. It was a 2-point game at halftime, but the defense came out and throttled TCU in the second half, held TCU to 5 of 24 shooting from 3, about 21%. The Horned Frogs only 38% overall. Meanwhile, balanced scoring effort from a Kansas team where so much the conversation coming into the year was how much depth they're going to have, how many players they brought in the transfer portal. They can beat you with a bunch of different guys any given night. And a lot of the time this year, that has not been the case. But this is one of those games where we kind of saw that show out. Dickinson had 16 and 9. Flory Badunga came off the bench to put up a double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds, also 4 blocks for him. AJ Storr had a nice game off the bench. Like, they got the production they needed to get from key players, and it led them to a comfortable win here over a pretty good TCU team, a TCU team that just beat Baylor at home. This is a road game for Kansas. So to go, you always want to pick up the road wins. You want to defend your home court, but you want to be able to pick up some marquee wins on the road and pick up some, you want to pick up the road games that you can. TCU, again, not a bad team, but this is a game Kansas needs to win. And they do. They go out, they get it done. They're now 5-2 in the Big 12. Meanwhile, TCU drops to 3-4 in conference play, isn't able to build on that momentum from that Baylor win, and falls to a good Kansas team at home. The last result in the Big 12 was the least surprising, but also just an absolute throttling. Houston beats Utah. They were 18.5-point favorites. Should have smashed the over on that. I believe Leaf told you to do that on Wednesday's show. He'd have been right. 34-point win for Houston in this one. 70-36 was the final score. The Utes had 26 turnovers. 26 turnovers for Utah. 19 of them were steals by Houston. Kelvin Sampson's team has been elite defensively for a long time. Shouldn't be a shock, but man, that is still an incredible result to get 19 steals in a single game. Neither team shot the ball well. Both teams were under 30% from 3, but when you force 19, or when you get 19 steals, when the other team has 26 turnovers and you only turn it over 5 times, folks, I've looked at a lot of box scores. I've watched a lot of basketball. I've studied this game for a long time. I cannot remember a game where the differential in turnovers was 21. That is unheard of. To only turn it over 5 times while your opponent turns it over 26. Crazy, crazy stuff. The Cougs now 7-0 in conference play, 15-3 overall. They have an 11-game win streak. Folks, this looks like a top 5 team in the country. I know people are concerned about their quad 1 record. As of right now, today, as this show is being recorded, they don't have a quad 1 win. Like 3 days ago, they had 2. They had 2 quad 1 wins, and then West Virginia fell out of being a quad 1 game. Central Florida fell out of being a quad 1 game. And now all of a sudden there's this narrative that Houston doesn't have any quad 1 games. It's kind of proof of the fallacy of the quad strategy, of the net rankings in general, that 2 days ago they're 2-3 in quad 1s, and now they're 0-3 in quad 1. That doesn't tell you a whole lot about the team. I understand that is kind of just, it's a part of it's the nature of the net rankings. I get it. I understand why they are the way that they are, but it makes in-season conversations like this just a little bit silly. Houston sure looks like one of the 5 best teams in the country when they do what they did against Utah. I realize Utah's not great, but Houston, they got Kansas at Fog Allen in their next game. They're at West Virginia, and then they're home versus Texas Tech. We're going to learn a lot more about this Houston team in those next 3 games. Quickly, a couple Big Ten results here. Not as exciting of a slate in the Big Ten for Wednesday. Northwestern, though, comes back and beats Indiana. It was a day of comebacks all across college basketball. Indiana was up 6 at halftime, but Northwestern scored 54 points in the second half to pick up a W. They did that on the back of 13 of 27 shooting from three, about 48%. Brooks Barnheiser had 21 points, 8 boards, 6 assists, and 6 steals. That is your fantasy college basketball stat line of the day. I'll tell you that right now. 8 of 14 from the field. Meanwhile, Ty Berry had 23 with 7 made threes off the bench. Indiana now drops to 5-4 in the Big Ten, 14-6 overall. They had 17 turnovers, which was a key issue for Mike Woodson's team. Nice game from Mackenzie Mbako, 20 points for him. Other result out of the Big Ten, USC wins at Nebraska. Nice road W for Eric Musselman and the Trojans, 78-73. This game was much closer than even that 5-point score indicates. It was a 1-point game with 19 seconds left after Connor Estigian scored at the rim. But unfortunately, while Nebraska was able to get a couple buckets towards the end of the game, USC knocked down their free throws, took care of business, ended up securing a 5-point win. They're now 4-4 in the Big Ten. Meanwhile, Nebraska drops to 2-6 in the Big Ten after shooting 5 of 24 from 3 in this game. Folks, Rick Pitino and St. John's got a big-time win in overtime over Xavier at the Madison Square Garden. We're going to talk about that game, plus 5 games to watch on Thursday, including another fun game in the Big Ten. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, attending NFL playoff games is an experience unlike any other. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and only shows you the best deals on great seats so that you can focus on what matters most, being there. I used Game Time Picks last weekend to grab tickets for Purdue at Oregon, took my dad out to a game in Eugene. It was a blast of a game. Purdue pulls off the win. It couldn't have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the views from my spot before buying the tickets. The all-in pricing is a game changer as well. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. So, folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, closing out the show with a couple more quick recaps from Wednesday and then some previews. We've talked about it before on the show. Thursdays tend to be a bit slower slates, not as many marquee games taking place on Thursday, but we do have a couple fun mid-major matchups. We got 2 ranked teams in action, including a fun Big Ten game. We'll get to that in a second. But first, St. John's, Madison Square Garden has narrowly escapes with a win over a Xavier team that was looking to keep their momentum going after beating Marquette last weekend. Instead, St. John's picks up the 8-point win, 79-71. Xavier led most of the game, but St. John's came back and picked up the W. If that sounds familiar, yep, that's been the theme of the show today. All 3 SEC teams did it. We saw it with Kansas. We saw it with Baylor. We saw it with Northwestern. It was not a good day to have a lead at halftime against a good team because they were going to come back and they were going to beat you. That's what happens here. Kadari Richmond had an opportunity to win this thing in regulation for St. John's. He had a phenomenal game, 19 points, 7 boards, 5 assists, 3 steals. But unfortunately, with 2 seconds left, he turned the ball over. Xavier had a chance to inbound the ball from the baseline with, I think, 1 point or 2.2, 1.8 on the clock. Ended up throwing the ball that tipped off one of the teammates. Marcus Foster inbounded the ball, tipped off one of his teammates, went out of bounds. St. John's then had the opportunity to inbound the ball and potentially get what would have been another game-winning shot. Instead, they get the ball stripped, don't get a shot up. It goes into overtime, but St. John's just rolled in overtime. Pretty much immediately took care of business. Richmond got a steal and an easy bucket. Zach Fremantle fouled out for Xavier, and that was kind of it. They just didn't have the horses to come back and stay in this game. Really hard to win overtime games on the road. St. John's, nice win for them, despite only making 1 3-pointer in this game, 1 of 12. They were 22 of 27 from the free throw line. Who needs 3-point shooters? There's a big storyline coming into the year for St. John's. Like, oh, they get Richmond, they get Devin Smith, they get all these guys, but they're not a bunch of good 3-point shooters. What's going to be the problem? Or like, how's that going to work? Just don't take very many of them. It's a bit of an archaic strategy, but it seems to be working for the Johnnies at this point. Balanced scoring effort from them. We mentioned Richmond had 19. RJ Luis, Simeon Wilcher, and Zubi Ejiofor each had 16. for the Red Storm, who are now in sole possession of first place in the Big East, thanks in part to Xavier, who beat Marquette and lost here to St. John's. The Musketeers, 8 of 20, which is 40% from three. The problem, they were 24 of 60 for the rest of the game, which means also 40% from the field. Ryan Conwell, 21 points for him, 4 of 9 from three. Fremantle had a nice game, but fouled out, which really hurt them. Ended a 3-game winning streak for Xavier. They're now 4-5 in the Big East. They host UConn next, and then they're at Creighton. So it does not get any easier for Sean Miller's team. We'll see if they can rebound from this or if they're going to fall further out of the conference standings. One more quick game to talk about here. We do have a couple of Mountain West results. I'll just mention in passing. Utah State blowout win over Nevada. The Aggies still looking phenomenal this season. Colorado State picks up a 3-point win over Boise State. Nate Clifford played really well for the Rams in that one. And then want to go to the ACC for our last result here. Clemson cruises past Syracuse. 86-72 was the final there. The Tigers were up 48-29 at halftime. And yeah, Syracuse wasn't going to come back from that type of result there. Down 19 at half, just kind of rolled over and weren't able to come back. Clemson now 8-1 in the ACC. They're 16-4 overall. Shot 9 of 20 from three. They had just 7 turnovers. Chase Hunter, great game, 23 points, 4 of 7 from three. Victor Locken had a double-double, 16 points and 10 boards. The question that I was going to pose, 8-1 in the conference, is Clemson the second best team in the ACC? However, the answer is still no, because Louisville is also 8-1 in the ACC. And guess what? They played each other head-to-head. Louisville picked up the W there. Clemson, though, third in the ACC, ahead of Wake Forest, who is 7-1, but outside of beating North Carolina, which I'm not sure that North Carolina is all that good. They don't have a lot of great wins yet. For me, it is definitely Duke at the top, gap. Louisville, Clemson's probably right behind Louisville. It's close there. Then there's a gap, and then it's some combination of Wake Forest and maybe you still toss North Carolina in there, but it gets kind of murky at that point in this conference. But Clemson still looks like a very obvious team to be in the big dance, playing some really good basketball right now. Syracuse, meanwhile, falls to under 500. They're 9-10 on the year, 3-5 in the ACC. They shot it well from three, 11 of 21. But that was mostly due to J.J. Starling, who was 5 of 10 from three, had 25 points. Eddie Lampkin had 14 and 9, but the rest of the team, the supporting cast, is just not there for Red Autry's team. Syracuse continuing to not really be able to pick up any major momentum in the post-Jim Boeheim era. Closing out the show with some previews for Thursday. We got 2 ranked teams in action. One of them, Memphis, who continues to be one of the few ranked teams that regularly plays on Thursdays. Wichita State going on the road at Memphis, who's 24th right now. This game is at 7 Eastern time on ESPN2. No FanDuel line as I'm recording this, but KenPom does favor Memphis by 14. They're 4-1 in conference play. Meanwhile, Wichita State is just 1-4. Tigers are actually favored in every remaining game at KenPom. We've seen this story before. We'll see if Penny Hardaway can avoid a late season collapse and can head into the tournament with some momentum and with a shiny number next to them in the AP Top 25. Big Ten game of the day, Maryland going on the road at 17th ranked Illini of Illinois, 9 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel favoring those Illini by 7.5. They've lost 2 of their last 3. That includes a home loss versus USC, which looks a little better now that USC beat Nebraska. 5-3 in the Big Ten. They got some nice wins. They beat Oregon. They beat Wisconsin. They beat Penn State. Maryland, meanwhile, since we talked about their big road trip debacle where they went out to Oregon and Washington and lost both games, they've now won 3 of 4. They're now 4-4 in the Big Ten. They got wins over Ohio State, wins over UCLA, also a win over Nebraska. The big matchup in this one, in the front court, Timislav Ivasic versus Derek Queen, 2 freshmen, 2 superstars in the Big Ten. Very fun to see how those 2 guys match up in what should be the best or one of the most exciting games, at least, in all of college basketball on Thursday. 3 West Coast mid-major matchups to talk about to close out the show. 2 of them in the WCC, 1 of them in the Big West. First, we got San Francisco, Chris Garlison of the Dons at St. Mary's in Moraga, 9 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. FanDuel favors the Gales by 8.5, and why not? St. Mary's is rolling right now, 6-0 in conference play. They have played all the bad teams. There's a pretty dead split in the WCC where the bottom half of the conference is pretty bad, and that is who St. Mary's has played. So we haven't seen them with a ton of tests at this point. They played well in the non-conference. They have a win over Nebraska. That seems to be the theme of the segment at this point. They also beat USC, who we talked about, and Utah, who we talked about earlier in the show. Their losses, they lost to Arizona State, they lost to Boise State, and they lost to Utah State. This is a good team. veteran team, a lot of players returning from last year's team. It's been a lot of conversation about the players they lost, namely Aiden Mahaney and Joshua Jefferson, who are at UConn and Iowa State, respectively. But this team still has reigning player of the year, Augustus Marcelonis, in the conference. They still have Mitchell Saxon, Luke Barrett. Meanwhile, San Francisco's been kind of struggling a little bit. They're 6-2 in conference play, but they have losses to Washington State, lost to Santa Clara. We'll talk about those two teams in a second. They lost to Clemson and Memphis in the non-con. They also lost a road game to Bradley. Malik Thomas, though, might be the best player in the conference or the favorite to win Conference Player of the Year. He's averaging 20.5 points per game. He's going to be a problem for St. Mary's. They're going to need to figure out how to contain him if they want to make sure they keep their undefeated streak in conference play alive. Washington State at Santa Clara, we talked about them already. They are facing each other. Wazoo on the road, taking on Santa Clara, 11 Eastern time on CBS Sports Network. So this game will be right after USF and St. Mary's. FanDuel favoring the Broncos in this one by 4.5 points. Santa Clara started the season 1-3. They were 3-5 through their first 8 games, but they've gone 10-2 since then. That includes 5-2 in conference play. They lost to San Francisco. That was an overtime loss. They should have won that game. It was tied. There was 0.9 seconds left. Christoph Tilley was at the free throw line, 1-1. Just needed to make one, and that game was over. He missed the front end. San Francisco wins that one in overtime. They also lost at LMU, but they have NBA talent on that team. Adama Alpha-Ball in particular, Carlos Stewart, elite guard duo. Should be fun to see how they go up against a Wazoo team that has been very good this year, but has been dealing with injury. Cedric Howard out for the year. Probably the best draft prospect in the conference, not named Adama Alpha-Ball. He's a forward, so they wouldn't have faced each other. It would have been fun to see him in this game, but he is out for the year. Wazoo has an ugly home loss to Pacific. Lamar Washington scored 40 for the Tigers in that one. But outside of that, their resume is very solid. That should be a fun basketball game on tap late on Thursday night. And then UC Santa Barbara at UC San Diego, 10 Eastern time on ESPN+. FanDuel favors the UC San Diego by 10.5. They're 15-4 overall, 5-2 in conference play. Santa Barbara's 12-6, 4-3. Two very good Big West teams. Should be a fun, albeit quite slow game of basketball. Both these teams are like outside the top 300 at tempo at KenPom. So expect like a 60-58 final between these two teams if you're watching some Big West hoops late in the evening tonight. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and I will be back with you all on Friday to get you ready for a fun weekend of games. And then Leaf will be with you on Saturday evening to recap all the Saturday action, get you ready for the rest of the weekend, and we'll get you back in next week as well. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. And until Friday, peace out.